introduced. The House comes to questions for oral answer. Question number 1, in the name of Andrew Little.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. My question is to the Prime Minister. Does he agree with the Children's Commissioner, Judge Andrew Becroft, that the level of child poverty means, quotes, "This is not the New Zealand I grew up in, nor is it the New Zealand most of us want"? If so, what responsibility does he take as Prime Minister for his government's record?
The Right Honourable Prime Minister.
Mr Speaker, we don't want children growing up in persistent deprivation. I'm proud of the steps the government has already taken, including raising benefits by $25 per week for the first time in 40 years, something not done by the previous Labor government. And alongside raising incomes, we're focusing on dealing with the complex dysfunction that traps families in long-term low incomes.
Supplementary.
Order. Supplementary question, Andrew Little.
Why are there more children living in poverty today than 8 years ago when National took office?
The Right Honourable Prime Minister.
Well, Mr Speaker, I don't agree with the member's assertion. Well, the New Zealand government publishes the most comprehensive measures of income of all developed countries in the world. And the most recent information is up to 2014, which is prior to changes in free doctors' visits for under 13s, the hardship package that was introduced under this government, and other measures that we're taking for smarter support for vulnerable families.
Supplementary.
Supplementary question, Andrew Little.
Why, after 8 years, has his government not set targets to reduce income poverty and material deprivation amongst New Zealand children?
The Right Honourable Prime Minister.
Well, Mr Speaker, we have. We've set quite specific targets with respect to all those factors that create the circumstances of persistent deprivation. That is reduction in recidivism rates, reduction in long-term welfare dependency, reductions in rheumatic fever. We've insulated 300,000 homes to improve the standard of housing and reduce the poor housing. And as I've said, we've increased incomes for families on benefit for the first time in 40 years.
Supplementary.
Supplementary question, Andrew Little.
Is it acceptable to him that, according to the Child Poverty Monitor report, 110,000 Kiwi kids live in houses with severe damp or mould problems?
The Right Honourable Prime Minister.
Well, Mr Speaker, of course that's not acceptable. The question is what steps. The question is the steps that should be taken to deal with it. This government has insulated 300,000 such houses and now runs much more focused systems for dealing with those children who show signs of ill health because of the quality of their housing.
Supplementary.
Supplementary question, Andrew Little.
How much money over the last 8 years has his government taken out of Housing New Zealand in dividends, while Emilita Bourne got sick and died in a cold, mouldy state house?
The Right Honourable Prime Minister.
Mr Speaker, I think the member misunderstands exactly how Housing New Zealand's finances work, but where tenants are experiencing ill health because of the standard of those state houses, money is not a barrier to fixing them. All such incidents are meant to be dealt with by Housing New Zealand within a short amount of time, precisely because of the ill effects on the tenants.
Supplementary.
Order. Supplementary question, David Seymour.
Is not the real problem with housing and poverty the fact that New Zealanders produce half as many homes per capita as we did in the 1970s?
The Right Honourable Prime Minister.
Well, Mr Speaker, the member puts his finger on the nub of the issue. Misguided planning laws over the last 10 or 20 years have meant that our cities have not been allowed to grow, and it has helped to push up the price of housing, and it's made it less likely that good quality, lower cost housing is built in our cities.
Supplementary.
Supplementary question, Andrew Little.
Nothing's changed.
Will he back my bill to make it illegal to rent out damp, mouldy, unhealthy homes? Or does he think it's okay for slum landlords to exploit poor families and make kids sick?
The Right Honourable Prime Minister.
Well, Mr Speaker, it's already the law, in fact, that you can't rent out a home that is going to be bad for someone's health.
Supplementary.
Supplementary question, the Right Honourable Winston Peters.
Mr Minister, is it not a fact that our parliamentary colleague from Epsom has stumbled on it, that we're not building nearly enough houses as we were in the 70s, and we've got mass immigration, which he's allowed in the 90s and the 2000s?
Did the Prime Minister not hear the question? I can have it repeated.
No, I think I didn't, Mr Speaker.
Right Honourable Prime Minister.
It is the case that there's been fewer houses built per 1,000 people, 100,000 people in New Zealand in the last 10 or 15 years because the planning laws have been designed to stop it happening. And as for immigration, the national-led government stands proudly open to trade, investment and migration.
Order. Order.
A lot of noise up the back there.
Supplementary question, Andrew Little.
After 8 years of rising child poverty on his watch, will he sign up to Andrew Becroft's target of reducing child poverty by 10% in the next year and take immediate steps to get there? Or are we just going to continue to hear more empty words just like we did from his predecessor?
The Right Honourable Prime Minister.
Mr Speaker, we published since 2012 a set of quite focused targets aimed at dealing with the social dysfunction that traps families in the combination of welfare dependency, criminal recidivism, low education levels and child abuse. And the data about that is more detailed and more transparent than pretty much any other developed country, and the government is acting on that information, in many cases family by family, because that is the only way to change their lives. Signing up to a target doesn't change their lives.
Order. Order. Supplementary question, Materia Ture.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. Does he accept the finding of the Commissioner for Children's report that on average 28 New Zealand children die each year of a poverty-related condition, each of those years being when National has been in government?
The Right Honourable Prime Minister.
Well, Mr Speaker, I haven't seen the detail of that. The Child Poverty Monitor takes information from the government's annual report on the state of incomes and households across New Zealand. But I think both the Labor and the Greens Party grossly oversimplified this issue. If it was just a matter of income, there would be no child poverty because incomes are higher than they were. The hard bit with dealing with child poverty is the social dysfunction which has been there for 20 or 30 years, and this government is addressing that in a more focused, thorough and transparent way than any previous government.
Supplementary question, David Seymour.
Is it not also related that 1 in 5 of the 60,000 children born in New Zealand every year are born into a family dependent on benefits?
The Right Honourable Prime Minister.
Mr Speaker, I think that is roughly the case. Of more concern is that about 1 in 100 of these children are born into households where there is criminal offending, child abuse, violence and long-term welfare dependency. And we are closely focused on working with those families to break what are long-term cycles of deprivation.
Order. Supplementary question, Materia Ture.
What is the point of his government's interventions if not one of them has saved a single one of those children's lives?
The Right Honourable Prime Minister.
Well, Mr Speaker, I just don't agree with the member. I mean, where there's been quite sophisticated advances in, for instance, interventions around rheumatic fever, where the rate of diagnosis of rheumatic fever has halved in the last 3 years, precisely because of excellent work done by the Minister of Health and Minister of Social Welfare. and the rate of substantiated child abuse, which was rising, has flattened out. Those measures, among many others, may well have saved lives.
Supplementary question, Materia Ture.
So how many families does he expect in 2017 will have to bury their children who have died because of poverty-related illness?
The Right Honourable Prime Minister.
Well, Mr Speaker, I would hope none. I would hope none, because that would be a tragedy for any family to bury their child. But what I do know is that billions of dollars have been spent in the last 20, 30 years ineffectively, because it's followed the recipe that that member would advocate, and that is throw money at the problem. This government is doing a much smarter job of supporting our vulnerable families, and of course we have a long way to go.
Question. Order.